Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you're doing well. We finished up with Numbers 14, and we saw that they had continued in this self-willed rebellion against God, and he had told them that none of that generation were going to enter in. And then from Numbers 15 through 19, several events take place that I encourage you to go through and read them, and you can see how they continue to rebel, and they're suffering the consequences of their sin, and the population of those who had come out of Egypt is beginning to be diminished as they travel on. But here we are in Numbers chapter number 20, and verse number 1 records the death of Miriam, who was Moses' older sister, and the one who had followed his little ark down the river to the sister of Pharaoh, and had been an important part of the journey. So in verse number 2, we begin, it says, "Now there was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron, and the people quarreled with Moses and said, 'Would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness, that we should die here, both we and our cattle? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is no place for grain or figs or vine or pomegranates, and there's no water to drink.' And Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them." Now, this is like the default argument that the congregation has settled in on. They, whenever faced with the difficult circumstances, and oftentimes as they go through the wilderness, it's a lack of water, instead of coming to God, who has provided for them water and food and everything they would need, coming as beloved children, beholding on to the promises of God, they just get together and complain. And they complain that it would be better to have died when the others died. It would have been better to have been left in Egypt. I mean, it's completely an irrational way of thinking, because they complained while they were in Egypt, and they just continued to complain and to complain, knowing the evidence was clear that if they found themselves, the people of God, in need, all they needed to do was come to God with their need. He was with them. He was amongst them. And I can only imagine the burden and frustration that Moses must have felt with this persistent lack of gratitude, lack of trust in God, because they just continued to complain. And I wanted to, pause and think, when I'm facing difficult circumstances, what's my default? Is my default to complain and ask God, where are you and why are you allowing this to happen? Or is my default to count my blessings, to look back on all of the times God has delivered me and taken care of me, and come to him as a beloved child and say, Lord, here is this need, and I trust you? Because a heart of thanksgiving, a heart of gratitude, liberates me from the mindset of lack, the mindset of a slave. And to know that what he delivered me from, my own slavery to sin, and has set me free, and given me these beautiful promises. That's where my victory is. And so the glory of the Lord descends, which is an amazing thing, before Aaron and Moses. In verse 7, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and Aaron, your brother, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield the water. So you shall bring water out of the rock for them and give drink to the congregation and their cattle. And Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he commanded him. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, hear now, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their livestock. Now, what do you notice right away? When they are in times of need, there is a rock available. I haven't been to the land, but I know the wilderness, this desert type area, was a rocky place. But this time God says, okay, take your staff, which was the staff that he performed all of the signs in Egypt, in which he took as the representative authority. And then when others complained and said, well, we're leaders too, we have the Spirit, that was the same staff that budded when all the others withered in comparison. And so God says, I want you to go to the rock and speak to it. And here you see this outburst of anger on Moses' part. He's just plain mad at these people. He's frustrated. And instead of speaking to the rock, he rebukes them. He says, hear now, you rebels. And he struck the rock instead of speaking to the rock, and he struck it twice. In verse 12, it says, and the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. These are the waters of Meribah, where the people of Israel quarreled with the Lord, and through them he showed himself holy. It seems like an awful severe punishment for Moses, losing his cool, hitting the rock twice instead of speaking to it. And I'm not sure I understand it completely, but it must be in some way a picture of the rock as being Christ, the source, our sufficiency. In 1 Corinthians 10, verse number 4, and it says, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. That rock that was struck once to bring forth water must therefore be a picture of the one-time sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, so that all would have available to them the living waters that bring forth life. And the picture of Moses striking it twice as a sign of unbelief and not preserving the holiness of God, acting out in anger, though it seems severe to us, would have marred the picture that somehow the one perfect sacrifice would not be sufficient, that there would have to be a sacrifice every time there was a need. And so I want us to remember, we look at their rebellion and we look at Moses' response, and we realize that even one who walked in intimacy and spoke to the Lord face to face suffered consequences for the decisions he made, for not believing in God. I think there's a lot of pictures that you can see, is that time of wilderness is sometimes a picture of the Christian life as we struggle, having been forgiven of our sins and set free from the penalty and power of sin, that there is a period in our lives of wandering and wilderness and trying in self-sufficiency to gain victory, but failing to enter into those promises. And a new leader would have to take them in across the Jordan. The promise that God made that they would enter in, they failed to believe and failed to go immediately in to the land filled with milk and honey. Then they complained that the land they were in wasn't filled with milk and honey. But the greater point is, Christ wants to lead us to be the source from which we draw all that we need, the spiritual drink that satisfies, so that we're ready to enter in to the promises of God. And that will never come until we see the complete insufficiency of self-sufficiency, and until we forsake the mindset of slave and lack and enter into this intimate relationship with our Abba. So today, remember, the rock, Christ, is the source, the foundation for all you will ever need, and you lack nothing. Now, Moses continues to lead the people throughout that 40 years of trial, and he continues to walk in an intimate relationship with the Lord, but he will not be able to enter in. And so, thankfully, in our covenant, we know that Christ is in us, and we have those promises secure. And he will never leave us, forsake us. But drink deeply, friend, because he's in you. With a heart of gratitude and thanksgiving, when it seems dry and the consequence is overwhelming, don't complain. Think about how he has provided for you each time, and drink deeply from the spirit of his life in you. I hope it encourages you and that you'll ponder it and remember it, and you have a great day.